Egypt is the key to regional stability. There's no doubt about that. It's the largest country in the Middle East. It has 83 million people. That makes it as large as Germany, larger than either Turkey or Iran. And with over 300, it's a huge country actually. It's got 339 square miles, but only 15,000 are inhabited. Only the Delta, this area along here, and down the River Nile. A couple of places out here in Siwa, little 4 oases out here. They're very, very small. So 15,000 square miles with 83 million people. It is crowded. Pristina, when we lived there in the 1970s, first of all, in the 1980s, it was, I think, 60 million people. The birth rate is very high, to say the least. Egyptians are wonderful people. I think you found from Egyptian visitors, they are remarkably very, very nice, sociable people. They deserve a much better life than they've got from the government. But before we get to the timeline for revolution, Egypt is not all a dark picture. Mubarak was indeed he was there in office far too long. The United States encouraged him to have a vice president. He wouldn't do it. Remember in 1982, shortly after he became president, upon the assassination of President Sadat, I met with a visiting senator in Colorado. And the Senator Byrd from Virginia, not Byrd from West Virginia, the old Byrd from Virginia. I asked him, Mr. President, why don't you have a vice president? When are you going to appoint a vice president? Mubarak looked at him and said, very straight face, there's only been one good vice president in Egypt's history, meaning himself. Under Gamal Abdel Nasser, there have been several vice presidents, 3 at a time. All of them plotted against him, except for Sadat. And so I think Mubarak didn't want to create a problem of succession that way. And throughout his years in power, he always insisted that anyone who got too big for his britches, he moved him out. Defense ministers, foreign ministers, whoever looked like he'd be more popular than himself, Mubarak found a way to sideline him. And that worked very successfully until his misjudgments of last year. But January 24, the revolt began in Tahrir Square. That was a vote largely for economic reasons. People went down. The Muslim Brothers were not the largest group in Egypt. You had in Egypt 2 political groupings. You had the National Democratic Party, the NDP, which is the government-controlled party, and then you had the Muslim Brothers, who were not a recognized political party, but who nonetheless were recognized for their social efforts, and they had many supporters throughout the country, particularly Delta and in the southern part of the country, and in poor sections of Cairo. They were very well organized too. But on January 31st, the revolt broke out. It got to be very serious. Every Friday, more people came out. We had 1 million people in the square a week later. The United States got to be very concerned what was going to happen to Mubarak. On January 31st, we sent our very distinguished ambassador, Frank Wisner, been ambassador for 5 years in Egypt. Richard had the great privilege of working with him in our time in Egypt, 1980s. He was sent a message from Mubarak that, look, it's probably time that you go. You should have a soft landing. And thereupon Mubarak indicated that indeed he would be going, but he would go in his own good frame. He tried to make what he thought big concessions. These concessions were not accepted by the people in the streets. They wanted it out, they wanted it out now. And finally, on February 11th, he was forced to resign. I was over in the region at the time, and I remember everybody waiting for him. He gave a speech a couple of days before, which was completely, as if another planet. There was just sort of small demonstrations in the streets, not the 1 million people you saw down in the streets of Cairo, which form a converge on down Tahrir, Liberation Square. In any event, he was replaced by a Supreme Military Council, which was formed by the head of the military, Defense Minister Tantawi. They are the ones who control Egyptian affairs at the moment. They formed a new cabinet. Initially, there were some holdovers from the old government, some very good people. They were all farmed out, so it's all new people there now. But the young activists who started this process got a bit concerned by the way things are developing. The military seemed to have an approach which was that they would have a referendum to change the Constitution. And young activists uniformly sort of said, look, we don't want to have merely a constitution amended. We want a whole new constitution. That should be done by a new parliament. We need time for a new parliament to form it. And many people from the young activists and secular groups feel very strongly that they should have a presidential election to get the new cabinet appointed by civilians, move the military back to the barracks, and then have the proper elections held in about a year's time, giving these new neophytes opportunities to form these political parties, which have not existed for the past 40 years. But in any case, the military went ahead with support from Muslim Brothers to hold referendum on May 20th. And this approved constitutional amendments, which did a couple of things. One, they limited the presidential term to 2 4-year cycles, and also made it legal for all political parties now to come forward. So this referendum, I think, was opposed by activists, by 2 leading presidential candidates. Muhammad Abadi, the former head of the IAEA, was against this referendum, as was Amr Moussa, the former foreign minister, former Arab League president, was also running for president, also thought this was not a good idea. But they, again, as indicated, preferred presidential elections followed by parliamentary elections, followed by the draft of a new constitution. However, this was not what happened. But now we have new political beginnings, but greater uncertainties. It's kind of like this young man pushing up the globe with the Middle East carved out, it's like pushing up Sisyphus. Egypt is essentially a one-party state since 1952. The National Democratic Party of Mubarak has been abolished, but many former members do remain active. The Muslim Brothers are the only group with a firm base in the country. They're now running as a formally recognized party, the Freedom and Justice Party. Just on January 23rd, they announced the electoral alliance with the WAF and 16 other groupings. The WAF party is a pre-revolutionary party. It used to dominate the parliament in the 1930s and 40s. It was very much against the British. It was a nationalist party, a very, very distinguished name. In the 70s and 80s, it's been allowed to participate. They haven't won any seats in an election, maybe 2 or 3 in parliament at a time. But very, very anemic party, but a good name. But they have decided to join forces with the Muslim Brothers, along with 16 other groupings, including Hizdigama, which is a largely almost Marxist party, which I used to go talk to them back 25 years ago. They didn't have any new ideas then. Same people are in charge, much more elderly, are on sticks, most of them. But nonetheless, they're forming the Muslim Brothers to fight the elections.